This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guests on the podcast today are Jude LaRose, Jeremiah Zimmer, and Justin Miller of Hop Butcher for the World from Darien, Illinois. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Cool. We're going to have a conversation, and I think we're going to talk a lot about hops because it seems like it's kind of core to what you do with the name of the brewery and everything else. But first, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. For 25 years, G&D has led the way on innovative solutions that match their brewing customers' immediate and future needs. G&D backs every project they touch and provides service second to none. Contact G&D Chillers today for your chiller sizing needs at 1-800-555-0973 or reach out online at gdchillers.com. Also, SS Brewtech founders started with a very clear goal to advance brewing equipment, design, performance, and quality to the very highest standards in the industry. The SS Brewtech team draws upon strong functional backgrounds in brewing science, mechanical engineering, industrial design, supply chain, and manufacturing. SS Brewtech has the people and skill sets you want and expect from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. Head over to ssbrewtech.com for more information on their brew houses and brewing gear. We have great respect for our sponsors because obviously they make it possible for us to bring you these conversations. And hey, they're pretty cool guys too.
Big
Agreed.
fans.
We are big fans.
All right.
We use a lot of BSG, and we haven't used G&D yet, but they're high on our list.
So let's talk about you. We're in Minneapolis for the Minnesota Craft Beer Festival. This crazy consumer beer festival that Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine puts on. This is the latest podcast I've ever recorded, and probably the most beer that I've ever drunk before we had a podcast. So let's see.
Honored.
Oh yeah, it's an honor.
Let's see how interesting this gets. You know, maybe 2 years ago, I started getting these random packages sent to our office. Maybe it was even 3 years ago. And they just appeared out of nowhere from this rogue brewery called Hop Butcher for the World that I'd never heard of before, out of the Metro Chicago area. And I didn't know what to make of this, and so we put them in the fridge and started drinking. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Still don't know anything. They seem to be a shadowy group making beer out of, like no exact location. And then the packages kept coming, and I kind of felt like you were stalking. But in the best kind of way. And then over time, as I kept drinking, it's like, why do they keep sending me 4-packs? Not that I'm complaining, it's great. But that required that I would drink more than one of them, each of them, which was also kind of interesting and fun. But over time, I grew really impressed with the approach that you guys have built for making beers that feel like you, that are hazy, that are full of flavor, that are exploring different flavors and hops. And so I want to delve into those questions with you guys, and first start as we always do here on the podcast. Give me a good 2 or 3 minutes on what your brewing background is, how you decided to move from whatever this, as a hobbyist into this kind of professional scene of brewing, and where you are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the funnest stories we like telling is how we started homebrewing in the backyard. We started before that as regular beer consumers. Everybody has their choice of mass-produced lager that they drank in college or when they turn 21. But I think everyone also has that aha beer. And Jude and I had met around the 2009, 2010 type era where we both stumbled on Gumball Head by Three Floyds at the same time. And that kind of opened the door to us to what craft beer could be, relative to your Red Stripes, your Rolling Rocks, Coors Lights, Bud Lights, etc. And that really opened the door also in the sense of we wanted to try as much as we possibly could. So what we ended up doing was effectively creating our own 12, 18, 24 packs. Not all that different than walking into a liquor store, making your own 6-pack, but we were all pitching in our own money into this group, picking a theme, and just trying as much as we possibly could. And what we found is that we, in comparison to some of the beers that we were tasting versus some of the beers that we had started brewing in the backyard, was that our beers weren't all that different. We enjoyed a lot of the beers that we were drinking, but we also felt like some of the beers that we were making were pretty good. And so that gave us a little bit of the delusion that we could maybe do this sort of thing. We had a lot to learn. We had an infinite amount of knowledge to soak in.
Delusion is the right word.
But that's really what kind of lit the spark, behind what we wanted to do, and that set in motion, I think, a series of events that eventually entailed us trying to figure out how we could do it on a commercial level and soaking in more knowledge and how do we make our beers better, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, you guys have not followed the standard, what is now the standard model, which sounds crazy because now this standard model has existed for maybe 4 or 5 years now, of launching a tap room and building out a brewery. You all have taken a different approach to kind of pursue this passion for brewing.
So what we did is we, and I want to say in 2014, we were able to start an Indiegogo campaign to raise enough money to buy a 15-barrel fermenter and install it in a brewery that allowed us to brew beer out of their brewery, but use their brew house on days they weren't using it and use all of their equipment. So I think when it came down to it, we were probably had enough ignorance and naivety in starting a brewery. We went ahead, and when we took a look at like what it would take to get a brewery off the ground, we didn't know if it's necessarily realistic, but to be able to maybe kick out 15 barrels of beer every month and kind of prove to ourselves or to the market that we could sell some beer, that we actually do it before we put in $750,000 or $1 million into a brewery. We just wanted to see that we could do it ourselves. So we started for a while, a year, just making 15 barrels of beer every month. And then eventually just bringing a mobile canner in through Illinois allows us to self-distribute beer, just get it out super fresh, and see, I don't know, what people would think of it at the time.
I find that interesting, and I love brewery startups with different approaches like this. I think there's this idea that it's all a taproom business. You have to do it that way. But if you look at craft beer right now, and they just announced the latest statistics on the at CBC, the amount of capacity in the craft beer world versus the amount of actual beer being brewed there's a crazy disparity between that. It's this massive gap between what brewers invested in, for equipment, brew house, and whatnot, versus the actual amount of beer that they brew, from that equipment. And that's, huge economic inefficiency. It seems pretty smart to share some resources, among smaller brewers rather than everybody buying, the same exact equipment and then not using it as much as they possibly could use it. So it's an interesting and smart strategy. How did it prove that the concept could work for you guys?
I think that, in hindsight, having essentially 100 or 105 cases worth of beer, or 15 barrels a month to move, right now seems crazy, right? Like we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years, like introducing ourselves to new accounts and introducing new beers, and that just sounds like such a small amount of beer. But at the time, we couldn't even fathom how we were going to get rid of that much beer. How are we going to have the time to sell this into accounts and get that many people excited about our beer? But it really allowed us to dip our toes into the market of just what Chicago beer is. But also get a read for how people feel about our beer, how quickly each beer that we pulled together sold, because we were doing a different beer every month. It wasn't the same beer over and over again. But it certainly felt like the most comfortable way to really test a concept and make sure that people were interested enough in what we were trying to do and set set forth to do before we, like Jude had mentioned, invested a considerable amount of resources and really put everything on the line, with families and personal careers. And
how, this is the question that I'm struck with, and I see this where we are in Colorado now, an endless stream of new small breweries canning beer, pushing it out through various distributors, 12%, etc. And so new stuff shows up on the shelf from brands that consumers don't necessarily have any connection to or understanding of. How do you, and maybe they buy it just because there's that pure desire to try something new and different or explore something that they're not familiar with. But, at the same time, like, how do you make a brand relevant, to individual beer fans? Without using those typical tools of this is the newest brewery in town and they've got a tap room that I can go visit, and it feels like this place and we have a neighborhood and those people like us and they turn their friends onto, how do you make that brand connect with individuals?
What I think was happening, let's say around like 2013 or 14, and I can only speak of like what was happening locally for us in the Chicagoland area. There was a time when there were breweries that were opening up, and self-distribution maybe was a new thing, and distributing the ability to can beer and distribute it 1 hour, 2 hours, 1 day old, 3 days old, 4 days old, was a new thing that was coming out. And Instagram was very new at the time. And there were breweries like Spiteful and Pipeworks that were hop-forward breweries in the Chicagoland area that were brand new and were canning beer and were very hop-forward and were getting this out from a self-distribution angle super quick to all the stores. And that was like a very fresh and brand new angle, especially like considering the fact it was hoppy beer. You could drink beer. I mean, there were people that were posting, this beer is 3 days old and we got it over to the Beer Temple in Chicago. And you can grab it right now. That was a really cool idea. And I think that we took inspiration from those breweries when mobile canning was coming online originally, where we were a very hop forward brewery at the time. And we decided to put, a lot of our focus on just making hoppy beer. I really think at that time, that was the kind of the angle that allowed any brewery at that moment to stand out. Not only was local really big, but the fact that like you could get the super bright Simcoe Citra Forward beer and it was canned 5 blocks down the street and, it was 2 days old or it was 3 days old, that pushed us to say, hey, we could can this in an hour and get this out 2 hours old and have you had a 2 hour old beer. At that point, that was cool. You could differentiate on hop combo. You could differentiate in the fact that we were making it down the street and we were going to get it down the block to you. You knew we canned it earlier in the morning. You were cracking a can later on that day. I mean, that was super gnarly.
And we didn't come from an area of an idea, right? Like where we started was we were trying to hand bottle everything. And what we realized as we were going through that process was that as we were looking at Facebook or Instagram and we were seeing everybody that Jude just mentioned, hey, this beer is 3 days old. And we were like, well, this beer is already 2 weeks old out of the fermenter. It's a 1 week old beer and we're just putting it into bottles now, which means we're not going to get to the shelves for another couple days. We were kind of like, we can't mess with that. So that inspiration was huge for us. So, we didn't invent freshness, any more than we invented brewing. But I think that what we were able to pick up on was something that we felt mattered to the beer consumer, but also that's something that got them and the accounts that were buying our beer excited. And we really just rotated right around that. What's gonna get us as fresh as Spiteful and get us to those shelves? What's gonna get us out to those accounts and get people excited? And we just kind of like naturally move towards that and try to figure things out that way.
And then at the same time, Jamie, Instagram is just coming on, and Twitter's probably more popular than Instagram at the time. So from a self-distribution angle, the fact that we were the ones throwing 30 cases of beer in the back of, like a Hyundai Sonata or like a Jeep Patriot. And we knew how 30 cases fit in the trunk. And we knew exactly where we were going because we were writing those invoices and we were writing the routes. And we were driving, to those stores, and we could stop at a red light and say, hey, we're a block away from so-and-so. And we could kind of like just say, we got 10 cases right
Feeding
here.
the hype.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it wasn't that. It was just we were so stoked we were so stoked to be making beer. Like we were so stoked that that we can beer for the first time. Like we had cans we could bring home to our families, to our wives, to our mom and dads, and say we made this, and it's not bad. And it was fresh, and we could take. I mean, that was real cool. So we were stoked. We're in our cars. We're sending messages back to people like, "Yo, boom, 10 cases, 5 cases of this like super Simcoe Amarillo Forward like red IPA. Like, go check it out." Like that was super cool. And then that little back and forth. I don't know. That was super from our standpoint, and we were just super enthusiastic about it. I don't know. That kind of like was the early impetus or like positive feeling behind that would build up and still kind of exists now for us.
Was there a moment where it just clicked, where all of a sudden you looked back and you're like, wait, people are really paying attention to us now, and we're selling all the beer we make?
Not immediately.
Only till later.
Yeah. It happened later.
It would take a couple of years.
But that dialogue that Jude mentioned became an important part of our daily life, right? I mean, from the moment from 3 hours old or 1 hour old to a couple days old, as those accounts were still moving through beer, telling people who followed our Twitter or who followed our Instagram or Facebook where they could buy our beer or how much was left, or the fact that it had never seen, it was so fresh it had never seen a cooler. Like it was sweating because it was directly coming out of the fermenter, going into cans, and then hitting a shelf. That dialogue has become a big part of who we are today, and we continue that back and forth with people who follow those feeds who are saying, hey, have you hit this specific account yet? And we're like, no, that's tomorrow. Or, hey, yeah, we hit them an hour ago. Give them a call, make sure it's there. And that I said it before, but that really became a huge part of who we were, but also what got us excited, because how fun is that someone cares or is so interested in buying what you just produced that they're like, how do I get it right now? Like, I'm leaving work early to go to the liquor store to buy your beer, and we're like, the least we can do is help you try to find it. And that's really become you almost wonder why that isn't like a thing, right? Like the least.
It's high maintenance. I mean, that really does require a lot of interaction and communication from you all.
Time.
And a lot of businesses. I mean, it's hard to find the resources to put into that kind of thing.
A ton of time, but how much better do we feel about making the next beer if we know that all of the people who wanted to find it could find it, bought it, and it eventually disappeared? And so that became super important to us.
And the thing, I mean, you do have to be very active, but we're the people that like Three Floyds like blew our minds, like Half Acre blew our minds, like we were getting into beer and all we wanted to do was talk about beer and drink beer and learn about beer and talk to the people that were making it and describe what we were feeling and what we were tasting, and just want to hear back and say, am I right? Like, is this what I'm getting? Can you tell me more about this? So I think it's like I think we said that we're just kind of like talking to people the way that like we would have wanted to be, responded back to. So in that sense, it's just, I don't know, enjoyable. Like, you can't believe that people pick up your beer and they're interested in it, and you put all you got into it and you live it so that people respond and they're equally interested. It's like, hell yeah. It's like, what do you want to know? What do you want to talk about? And that they're showing that enthusiasm. I mean, in that sense, while there might be you're stoked that there's a lot of messaging back and forth, you have no problem. You're more than happy because, you're so much of a fan of beer in general, and you know what it's like, that you're just talking shop back and forth. And you're, equally the maker, the supplier, but you're equally the beer geek. So, I mean, in that sense, it's like, it's no sweat.
Sounds good. Let's get into a little bit of more direct discussion about how you're brewing these beers and some of your design around that. But first, great beers are made from select ingredients. With BSG, you'll bring the world to your brew house with an unparalleled and diverse selection of ingredients from across the globe to just down the road. Their dedicated customer service team and industry experience provides you with the assistance you need in every step of the way. Let BSG be your supplier of choice for products essential to making great artisanal beverages so you can stay focused on your craft. For more information, visit them at bsgcraftbrewing.com or call 1-800-374-2739. Also, this episode is brought to you by the American Homebrewers Association, the largest community of homebrewing enthusiasts in the world, and a source for great brewing resources and recipes. All right. I think it's time for us to open up a beer.
Amen, brother.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about this beer that we're drinking right now.
So this is our sort of our base double IPA that we have loaded up.
What's the name of this beer?
This beer is called Loophole Technicality. Sorry, I forgot to say that. It's one of our latest releases. I believe it's like a week old, so that goes back to
It's so fresh.
Our freshness conversation for sure. Yeah, it's super fresh. This is a hop combo we've been like toying around with for a little while. We're super excited about it.
What's the combo?
It's one that we've been like.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say
you're gonna lay it out there.
Yeah, I'm laying it out there thick. Yeah. So it's Amarillo, it's Strata, and it's Galaxy.
Okay.
So it's a hop combo we've never used before. We've used a couple of those hops together in conjunction before and had great success. But we wanted to bring one of our favorite newcomers to the table, and that is the Strata hop.
It's so hot right now.
It's insanely good, and it's hot for all the right reasons. It's super. What's the word? It's kind of like a chameleon, right? You can use it in a bunch of different beers, and it'll spice it up. You can blend it with a lot of different hops, and it will jump out. It'll make itself known, but it won't take over the party. You know what I mean? It's a great accessory hop, but at the same time, it can drive the show if you let it. And I remember the first time I rubbed it, we had just a couple bags, and we were kind of looking for a substitute for Chinook. And I rubbed it, and I'm like, guys, we need to buy more of this, like stat. We need to buy more. So we did, and we started putting it in everything. So, this is Loophole Technicality. It's 7.5% double IPA, hazy double IPA. It's got a bunch of oats, both flaked and malted. Some white wheat. It's got some carafoam.
What kind of percentages do you build base malts out of with those kind of higher protein malts?
Ooh, we are anywhere from the 55 to 60% range. We're not super heavy on base malt, but we do like to go.
Really? That's
we do
okay.
we do like to go a little more towards the slightly more kiln base malt. So we are using a lot of two-row and pale. Like we're not super keen on the pills, but we like to mix it up every now and then and blend some pills in there. But for me and for us, we really like how some good old-fashioned pale malt just like works together in conjunction with the hops.
I think one of the coolest things about some of these types of beers that we've built and released is that what we're trying to do is paint establish a good canvas for the hops to do the talking. Right, they're not all the same grist, but what we want to do is we want to build something interesting and delicious, and then get out of the way and let the hops do what they do. Yeah. And so will be occasions where we might get obsessed with a hop or a new hop like Sabro or Strata, and then really fire down the line of hops we consider quote unquote bangers, like Citra,
bangers,
Mosaic,
those banger
Galaxy,
hops.
Exactly.
That's
Vic
a buzzword.
Secret. So when we
every time we say that word,
every time Jared says bangers, take a drink.
We discover hop, we rub it, we are intrigued by it, and then it's Citra and Sabro. It might be Mosaic and Sabro. It might be Vic Secret and Sabro. Galaxy, if we can get our darn hands on some Galaxy. But one of the things that really drove this hop combo, but also what I got excited about, was I felt like we were getting to know this year's crop of Galaxy better than we had ever before, and really figuring out the intensity of that hop and what percentage of that hop bill Galaxy should comprise of to still allow the other two hops we were using to shine, but also not to come off too green right out of the gate, which is an issue for a lot of people using Galaxy this
Sure.
year.
So where did that land for you guys?
I think 15 to 20%, right?
Yeah,
that's about where we're at.
There was no Galaxy in the kettle, and it was just a decent sized Galaxy dry hop. But the majority of the kettle hops and the majority of the dry hop were definitely made up of Amarillo and Strata. We figured that a little spattering of Galaxy, especially with how intense it is and how aromatic it can be, especially with how grassy it's been these days. We felt that, if we kind of let the other two hops run the show together as like, the two best friends that anyone could have, that it would work out,
There's a song reference for everything with you guys, isn't there?
Kind of.
Maybe is it the three best friends?
When you say kettle hops, I assume you're meaning Whirlpool hops.
I do, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we like to. We don't go as heavy as a lot of people in the Whirlpool. For us, we like mixing it up depending on the type of hop we're using, but a lot of the time we're kind of reserved on it because, we're in the brewery all the time tasting these beers out of the fermenter, and for me, if we're gonna spend we're gonna spend what they're charging you for these hops these days, I feel like you get the most bang for your buck in the dry hop, and for me it's all about aroma. The first thing you taste with is when you open the beer is you smell the aroma and you can imagine how it's gonna taste, and that sort of sets the expectation. So for us, it's all about aromatics, and we don't leave anyone hanging. We love to use these hops in the kettle too, but for us, yeah, it's like I said, it's all about the aroma.
So one of the the major challenges the brewers face when piling this many very expensive hops into their beers is maintaining the intensity of that kind of aroma. That's something that I find all of your beers do very well. They are very bright and they're very intense right out of that can right after I pour them. What kind of techniques do you use to maintain that level of intensity? And not say, blow off all of those wonderful aromatics that you're spending so much money on in these hops.
So we've tried a bunch of different methods. We've tried dry hopping, different intervals. We've tried capping the dry hopping under pressure. Dry hopping during fermentation. We've literally tried everything. We've tried recirculation. Pretty much any method. If you've tried a hop with your beer, you've tried that method, or if you tried a couple, you might have.
Unbeknownst to me, I've tried one of these methods. Yeah.
We've kind of settled into something we like recently, and it's gonna sound crazy, but it's super no frills. We like to still have a little bit of activity going on our dry hop, not enough where it's like you're up there tossing pellets in and it starts to come back up on you. We like to.
What kind of gravity do you start dry hopping at?
We start dry hopping probably, I would say, 1.5 to 2 Plato away from finishing gravity.
Okay, yeah.
And after that, I'll bung it. We'll keep an eye on it, and we'll just monitor it throughout the rest of fermentation. And right from there, we're not having to lose any of that aroma, and we're only doing one massive charge.
So you're just dumping them in, not rousing, just leaving them in your tank, and
we let the fermentation rouse it. Oh. We let all of that stuff happen naturally, and in certain scenarios where I feel like like maybe the window has passed by, or maybe we're a little too early, we'll play it out, and I'll make sure we have methods for if I feel like the dry hop isn't quite hitting where we want it to be. I've got some tricks up my sleeve that I can do to sort of take care of that. Nothing crazy,
tricks
nothing super
such
special.
as
he's a magician.
Set yourself up.
Yeah, no,
a
magician never reveals his tricks, but yeah, but honestly, it's nothing crazy. I'll rouse the tank. I'll try some really quick recircs, stuff like that. Nothing crazy. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're just trying to be consistent, and we're trying to really, we're not trying to cheat anyone. If we say there's going to be a ton of these hops in there, there's going to be a ton of these hops, and you're going to get that flavor,
And
there's always a difference between saying and putting a ton of these hops in, and having somebody be able to perceive that you've put a ton of those hops in. There are plenty of folks that put a ton of hops in, and then for various reasons, you just don't have the perception that they've actually done that.
Exactly.
Closing that gap, I think, is one of the interesting things that you all have done well.
So I feel like there are things that we can do to capture aroma, but from the top, I think first of all, it starts with, and I think that it's something that we've learned probably through trial and error from failing, is that it probably first starts with having hops that are higher in oil content. So that in our mind would be first and foremost. So as much as so we named our brewery Hop Butcher for the World, and it gave us license to pursue a passion of ours, which was to explore hops. So there were, so at the time when we would have named our brewery, there was all these cool hops coming on board, and you wanted to be able to use them. And I think we looked inwards and we said, it not only gives us license to use Citra and to use Mosaic and to use Galaxy and Nelson, but it also gives us license to use all these new hops coming on. But I think that what we learned is that while we could brew 50% Citra and 50% Mosaic beer and just get a banging beer out of it, at the same time, we wanted to see what was coming out, and we wanted to kind of test those waters with other hops that were emerging. And then I think what we learned is that sometimes those hops in the end may have not had the highest oil content, and that would have come out in the beer. And those might have not have been the most expressive or the most intense aromas that we wanted out of the beers that we were tasting from our peers or from our favorite breweries and stuff like that. So what I think that did is it required us to dive deeper into what oil content was and what oils these hops were made of and what intensity meant and what that meant for the finished beer. So while you could hop with some banging hops and you can do all you could to capture aroma, I think what it really told you is if you're going to use certain hops, you're going to have to not face the consequences of using them, but you've got to learn, what they're gonna produce. And while we want to be Hop Butcher for the World, and sometimes we want to get super gnarly by using these super cool hop combos and use hops in ways that they haven't been used before. Sometimes you might have to sleep in the bed that you made. You use these hops with the new names on them, but they just aren't the most intense. So I think that really kind of taught us, first off, you use these hops and high oil content, you use Galaxy and Citra, and this is how the beer is going to net out. If you want to use beers that aren't, this is how it's going to net out. So I think what it taught us is how we could balance the two and what hop oils mean, and when it comes to volumes of dry hops, how to maybe still achieve a level of intensity, but still use the hops that are newer and don't have higher oils, but you still want to get that character and you still want to be pushing the envelope. And I don't know that we necessarily ever would have gone down that route if we didn't do that, or if we didn't fail, or if we didn't see, we wanted to use this and it didn't come out intense, and why didn't it do that? It's this is why. So I think as we start to look at things, we start to play with our beers and think of our beers more so in terms of what are the hops. What hops are we using? What are their oil contents? What are they going to bring? In what volumes do we use these types of things? And then, we could succeed or fail, but really on the back end, it's got to come down to us, and we sensory the things out and say, why didn't this, should this big hop have provided more of the canvas? This one with the low oil content, can we get more of this? Should we brought this back? We never would have gone down that route. So, to going back, it's it probably starts at the top end with thinking about the intensity of the oils and the hops that you're using in the first place,
Yeah, so you want to get to know those ingredients just as a chef would want to know those ingredients. So from a homebrew level.
Yeah, and the ingredient is one thing, and I get you there. I think where this gets infinitely more complex is the interaction of those ingredients. And then we start talking about multivariate axes here and the impacts, where small things can have bigger outsized impacts relative to what somebody might assume from raw numbers. I'm curious about that, especially when you talk about lower oil hops, and do you have some rules of thumb about how you pair these things together, looking at the various oil content of these, and then building a math that supports the the kind of volume contribution for these to build a flavor profile that you might be trying to achieve?
We absolutely do. So we mentioned a few earlier when we were talking about bangers, right? Like you got your Citra, you got your Mosaic, Galaxy, Vic Secret, Simcoe. When you a good example is Belma, right? Crosby Hop Farm, they have Belma, and it's supposed to bring like red berries and strawberries, and you'd think, all right, well, I could just make a single hop Belma beer and it'll taste like strawberries and berries, but you could do that, and it might be great. Or you could pair it with a banger like Citra and probably have better results. And I think that sometimes that it's easy as a home brewer, as a commercial brewer, to get sucked into a description, and really you got to find out for yourself through sensory analysis, through rubbing, through tasting other beers that use that certain hop or whatever. But what we've been really passionate about doing is that our constant churn of new and multiple beers per month have provided us the opportunity to really be smart about the hop blends that we're using, but how we really dive in on new hops. Sabro is one, Strat is another. We've used a ton of hops that don't even have names yet, or some who used to not have names and now have names. But the safest way that it feels for us to really get to know a hop is to pair it with things that we know that work, right? Like we know what Citra brings to a beer at 7.5 versus 5 3/4. We know what Mosaic does. We know what Vic Secret, Galaxy, Simcoe, Cascade do. So when we add in these new hops that we've never used before, and we get that new angle to something, then we taste that beer and we're like, all right, what if we paired it with this? And then we mixed in a little bit of this, maybe just in the dry hop. Or what if we use a little cryo and try to really hammer home this specific point? Or what if we dry it out a little bit and then we go into the yeast angle? You talk about a lot of variables. There are infinite ways to make this beer better. And so it's not only the next beer that we brew, even if it's a different hop combo that we're building on the last one, but it's also the next time that we brew that beer again, which constantly changes with our lineup and having no flagships. And
you just said something that I find really interesting, and that's how Citra behaves at different ABV levels. It's something that we really haven't talked about, I think, very much. But how does that alcohol level of a beer impact perceptions of some of those banger hops, and then some of the I'm throwing air quotes around that, and then some of the kind of supporting hops that you build to create some depth around them?
That's kind of an interesting question for sure, and it's not necessarily something that we sort of like sit down and we write it on a piece of paper and we say how do these hops at different ABVs sort of taste different. But it is something that we have noticed, and it's something that we definitely take note of. We do a lot of pale ales at 5.75, and we do a lot of hazy doubles at 7.5. And for instance, we did a all single hopped 5.75% Citra pale ale. And that was one of the first times that, we loaded a dry hop up with Citra, and I sort of came out of it thinking, this is a completely different Citra character than what I'm used to. It was way less like ripe mango, way less like bright tropical fruit, and sort of that stanky, that stanky, there's really like this stanky orange peel kind of thing that Citra has going on. It's not quite grassy, but it's super stinky, but it's stinky in all the right ways. And it had sort of like a drier orange character to it, if that makes any sense. It was like I said, it was less sweet. It was not nearly as bright, and that's something that we definitely took note of, but it's not something that we necessarily sat down and said, hey, maybe it's because of the ABV that this was going on. And I know Jude's had some stuff that he wanted to chime in on, but
Was it just ABV, or was it also just the like different residual sweetnesses that come with the smaller, slightly drier beer, versus something like a double IPA, which is just gonna have a higher finishing gravity?
yeah, I mean that's obviously going to play a factor in it.
Yeah.
But I'm also looking at like factors like maybe this beer finished up a little sooner, so maybe the dry hop target time was slightly off. Maybe it wasn't as active in the fermentation. We used a little bit less of it because we didn't want to drown out the rest of the flavors from the whirlpool. All those sort of factors go into it, in addition to the residual sweetness and maybe a little bit of that extra residual sugar that is there from the fermentation.
So you had asked like how we play with hops or how we compare oil contents of things, and the cool thing is that like we're always learning. We're always trying to sensory things out, and you kind of set your own course and your own you kind of set in your mind, this is the way that we're going to go down, and we're going to establish these type of standards, and from there we're going to start to test things out. So it's like we'll use a hop like, let's say Motueka, and we read it has a 0.8 oil content, and we're like, all right, we know we want to pair it with Citra, and we know that the range of the Citra might be from, I don't know, like 2.3 to 2.8 or 1.8 or 1.8 to 2.5. So we start to take into consideration, okay, if we want to, dry hop with, let's say, like, 2.5 pounds, maybe 2.8, maybe 3 pounds per barrel, let's consider the type of hops we're using and what percentages, what their oil contents are. So you go and you use it, and you brew a beer, and it comes out a certain way, and then on the back end you try to analyze stuff like that. So like we just did, for the first time, we got our hands on some Sabro, and we paired it with Citra. So everything that you would think about Citra from a brewing perspective and its intensity and its character, and we used this brand new hop called Sabro. And let's say like we did a beer where we went, let's say 60% Citra and 40% Sabro, and then the net result of it is that the Sabro just punched its way through, and it was the more intense of the hops. And you say, how the hell did this happen? We use 60% Citra. Citra's the banger here, and 40% Sabro. And then you go back and you're like, shit, like, Sabro's a 3.8 at max, and Citra maybe is 2.5. Holy shit. Like that's how this beer netted out. This shit's intense, right? So it's like we start to think of it that way. It's like we did 60-40. Maybe we need to separate this even more. So then the next beer we do a mosaic beer with Sabro, and we take a look at those oil contents, and we say, you know what? We know what 60-40 was like with Citra and Sabro. Let's just keep the let's eliminate the variables. Let's just replace the Citra with mosaic and learn what's going on with Sabro. And then you get this other hop, and the Sabro was intense, but not nearly as intense it was with the citrus. And then you're starting to form this own catalog of things going on in your mind. We really wanted to use Waimea, and it was like netting out, I think, at like 2.2, 2.3, and we're like, all right, we want to use Citra with this beer, we want to use Galaxy with this beer. This is what Galaxy's like lately. We know Galaxy's really big, Citra's really big over here, Citra's maybe 2.5. All right, how do we want all these guys to net out? So it's like, all right, we're going to go 55 Citra. We think those oils will get us a lot higher. Waimea, who knows what's going on, but it's saying it could be as intense, so maybe we need to scale that back a little bit. And at that sense, it's like you feel like safe enough in your approach, and you know what you're using, and you brew it, and then it comes out and you taste it, and you're like, all right, and then you start to kind of chop it up, and then that informs the next one. So unfortunately, you have to brew it, and you have to take that chance, and you form a like a gnarly way of doing it where you're going to get a gnarly beer. But I feel like that's how we're starting to learn about what these hops are all about.
And then it changes for you every year when there's a new harvest.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's the fun part of this job, right? Like we get a sample, or we get to go out and rub something with a farmer or a hop supplier, and it completely changes our opinion of a certain hop or how it might blend into all of that. And I just feel like that feeds into the whole exciting piece of brewing, which is if you stop learning, or you're not as excited about learning constantly, what are you doing? And that keeps us on our toes. That keeps us fresh. That keeps our beers exciting. And it's really that's truly part of who we are.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned that like maybe it would be cool if we had some sort of mathematical like way to say if we plug this hop in, and that hop. Eventually
I'm specific. There is another brewery out there. I won't name names that really.
No, I
has
totally
that,
believe that. Eventually down the line, maybe we can get something like that going. But right now, we're having too much fun, just trusting our senses and working together as a group, and really just like getting deep into those hop rubs and taking all our experiences and taking that cumulative effort that we've got going on and just learning from it, and it's super organic.
Let's talk a little bit about cryo hops. I know you guys have some interesting and specific experiences and perceptions of using cryo hops that don't necessarily match up to this is we simply use half as many hops and it produces a similar kind of flavor. So tell me from your perspective what you guys have gotten out of cryo hops, some of the different cryo varieties, and how that has impacted some of the beers that you make, and how you think about using cryo hops in hops blends now.
No, we absolutely love cryo hops. I mean, every time we sit down and rub a cryo hop sample or any sort of cryo hop, we are just enamored with it, and we're
why?
Well, I guess for all the people out there who have never rubbed a cryo hop, basically imagine like your favorite ice cream, and you open up the container and you smell it, and you're like, oh man, this is a nostalgic flavor that I love. But now imagine that it's that flavor like tenfold, twicefold, or three timefold. I know I went down there.
Without the aroma of the cardboard
ice
cream top.
Exactly. Yeah, the cardboard ice cream top's gone now, and now you just have like a super saturated, pistachio ice cream, or you have a super saturated, maple pancake ice cream. Who knows what you're going for? And when we rubbed. When you rub certain hops that you may already have a certain perception of that are in cryo form, it can sort of do what Jeremiah was talking about earlier and sort of change your perception on those hops. One of those hops for us was Equinox. Like that's a hop that we like using in smaller amounts because the classic T90 pellet version has a decent amount of vegetal green pepper characteristics that when you use it in such large amounts, that really starts to come out, and it can get a little bit overbearing. However, when you use Equinox Cryo, that vegetal matter, that green pepper that's there, is sort of non-existent. It's just straight tropical fruit to the highest extent. You got like super bright lemon, you've got super bright papaya. It's like, wow, where was this hop my whole life? Like, why can't I use this all the time?
So does that change then, like, for example, contact times, lengths of your dry hops? You maybe don't have to drop things out as quickly because you're not as worried about getting a vegetal character out of it. Are you using them functionally in different ways than you might otherwise use regular pellet hops?
Yeah, for sure. We never. It hasn't gotten to the point for us where it's really changing our schedule. We don't use. We like to add the cryo hops here and there to sort of augment our dry hops. We haven't really gotten to the point where we're replacing like more than 50% of our dry hop with cryo hops yet. We like to use it as a tool to sort of boost what otherwise might be unboostable, in the sense of if we boost it to this point, we're going to get too much vegetal matter. So the only way to boost it is to use cryo to get more of that great flavor that we're looking for. We haven't really been able to get our hands on enough of it to supplement a dry hop in a lot of the ways some of the other breweries are doing it. Like we were just over at Modest, and they're all about cryo now, and they have some awesome thoughts on how you can use cryo and use a shredder pump, and that saves them a ton of time, and their yield is so much better. And when you talk to breweries like that really use it, it's super inspiring, and it definitely inspires you to use more of those hops.
It's a cool question because we'll brew, right? So we'll brew a West Coast like pale ale, and let's say it's Citra Mosaic, and we'll use Mosaic pellets. And let's say like Mosaic Mosaic's named it's because it provides a mosaic of flavors, right? So it can get super tropical, but it gets super stinky, right? But in a West Coast pale ale, we don't mind some of that stinky, right? To go with some of that bitterness. But then we might be building a hazy double IPA, and as we're going through the hop combo, we're looking for that last third. And mosaic might come up, but in that sense, it's like we're not looking for mosaic pellets because we might have that dank covered, and we're just looking for the big fruit. Maybe like the original mosaic in our minds, which just was all fruit. So it's like, let's revert to mosaic cryo on that one. So, to answer that question, yeah, I guess we are changing applications based on cryo like that. Same thing with Equinox. It could have that vegetal matter, which could be cool in a dank-ass West Coast beer, but as we're going through, maybe we want to round out those edges, but we say, you know what, Equinox, like that Equinox Cryo's just got all the tropical elements, all the pineapple elements that the Equinox pellet has with, minus some of the other stuff. So it's like, let's just sneak in 11 pounds of these, cryo pellets, and maybe that is 22 or whatever. But yeah, that's absolutely the way that you would think of it. And then maybe in the reverse, you wouldn't, maybe you want something stinky in your West Coast, and you're like, no, we're not going to use the cryo because it's just this, and we want that and this, and So that's, so yeah, and that's what's cool with hops, is like that type of stuff is happening, right? And you have those type of options. That's cool. And then the question is, I guess, it's like, so what other cryo are we not using? What's Cascade? What's Cascade cryo like compared to pellets? And as they're starting to cryo pelletize all these other hops, it brings up that question. And then I guess the other thing is that if we're talking about like selecting hops and wanting to decide, select hops based on a certain character, it's like, if you can't select hops, is all the cryo the non-vegetative and all fruit and less stinky portion of that? So if you can't select the best whatever hop, are we going cryo? I don't know. Who knows? We'll try it out. We could be wrong though.
That's interesting. Does cryo, the process, eliminate some of the more drawback characteristics of otherwise, less desirable lots of those hops? I don't know.
But sometimes those less desirable hops do have those applications.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me, are there any other bangers that we haven't talked about yet that from your perspective that you love making beers with?
Ooh, sure.
And are there other combinations with those bangers and then those kind of supporting hops that just really sing for you guys?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of the obvious ones, the Citras, the Mosaics, pair them together. Citra Mosaic, Citra Galaxy. We're continuing to learn about new ones. We mentioned Strata, so Citra Strata, Mosaic Strata, Citra Sabro, Vic Secret Sabro.
Oh, yeah.
Vic Secret, that's
Vic
right.
Secret.
That's a big one for you guys.
I
We
will
love
take
that
Vic
hop.
Secret over Galaxy any day of the week these days.
Conflicting
Personally.
opinions, but yeah, there's merit to all of it, right? Like but when you're talking about hops like that, we don't even have to think about whether or not that's worth trying. Like if Jude's like, we should do Vic Secret and Simcoe, and we know of a really great Simcoe lot that we're excited about, and Justin's like, we should do Vic Secret Citra, it's like, yeah, we should do both. Let's just figure out where we're going to do it, or when we're going to do it. I think there's always new territory to be explored with old hops, right? As you continue to explore new hops like the Sabros, like now there's a hop called Provoke, which I thought was an experimental hop that we had used but wasn't. So we're talking hops like HBC 472, which is supposed to bring some barrel characteristics, which is also what Provoke is supposedly supposed to do, or 06297, which is orange tropical vanilla that is now called Lotus. As you continue to learn about those hops, now you find yourself kind of sitting in your chair thinking, what does this do with Cascade? What does this do with Citra? What does this do with Comet? So there are all kinds of like applications with older hops that if you're really excited about this realm of beer and brewing, like you really constantly want to like get back to your roots too and be like, Well, what about what I already knew? You know, what about the first thing that I learned about hops, or what if I did noble hops here? Which is what I liked about your question earlier. Is like, how do you compare your hop selection? Or you're talking about this or that, or what do you like? And when you're rubbing hops, and we've rubbed noble hops, and then we've rubbed cryo right after that, and it's like smelling diesel, after smelling water sometime. And you really got to like reset your mind and get yourself in the right mind frame of like, all right, that's gonna be different because this is like the ultimate concentrate. But like if we're brewing this or that, or we're doing a pilsner, or we're doing a Hafa that like we want to use a Citra in, like maybe noble Citra makes more sense. So like we're constantly excited by those new products that your folks at BSG and CMG and Hopsteiner and all those guys that are constantly trying to come up with what's new and latest and greatest and getting people excited. But there's so
It's like
much out there.
Smoking some Jamaican Blue Mountain ganja versus some 30% THC ultra hybrid.
You really just got to immerse yourself in every possible variable you can get your hands on, and then just like come up with what sounds delicious.
I think that the way that we internalize things is that like all hops are good, and I think that we'll tier things out. Like tier 1 will be the hops that could stand alone on them by themselves, and that like maybe the second tier is like these are the hops that we would pair with the hops that would stand alone on themselves. But going back to the idea that you've got to have the idea that all hops are good, and that our challenge is to be able to unlock what's there. So that the onus is on us to find the right combination of things. Our big thing, and I think that the challenge that we present to ourselves, that I think what's on us is that we're always trying to unlock new flavors and new aromas. They're out there. So it's on us to be able to unlock like the right combinations of all these hops to do that. So again, it's not like a question of if a hop's good or if it's hop's bad. It's just probably if we're using it the wrong way or we don't know how to use it. So I think the challenge is that it's all good. All the flavors are out there. It's on us to be able to find out how we could unlock new flavors and aromas with the right combination.
So what have you been rediscovering lately? What, on that kind of older school hops character, older school varieties, have you found may be more intriguing with some, in combination with some newer varieties, and provide, something that may be unexpected?
The best example in our lineup of that, in my opinion, and I'd let these guys answer differently if they feel differently. We do an imperial coffee stout called the World's Colombian Coffee Exposition, and in that beer we use UK Phoenix. It's maybe the only UK or older traditional hop that we use in any of our beers. It's not a new, sexy, tropical, fruity hop, but we select it because it brings molasses, it brings chocolate, it brings leather, and we looked at that and we thought, well, what better application than a stout, or like a big stout with coffee for that hop than that, right? So we use that. We also pair that with HBC 472, which is what I mentioned earlier, which is supposed to bring a little bit of coconut, a little bit of barrel characteristics. But we felt like if we're using this in that flavor addition realm, that aroma addition realm, even in a beer like an imperial coffee stout where you're not making big whirlpools or big dry hops, like these are two hops that are both old and new that can work together in harmony and really kind of bring what we're looking for. And what we've done with that beer is, even before we bomb it with coffee, we'll sometimes divert some to some barrels because it's a really exciting base. So if we feel like we're really getting the kind of base that we anticipate from our, from a double mash, whether we're doing that or we're just cranking a straight brew out, that would taste great with a rum barrel or a bourbon barrel or a whiskey, or let's do a blend, or let's try an absinthe barrel, which we have, cooking right now. So, Yeah, old hops and new hops that have names, new hops that don't yet have names, ones that are tried and true, ones that we haven't used. It's like you really got to explore all avenues, and like all of that is exciting.
When your name is Hop Butcher, we'd expect nothing less.
Yeah, right?
Oh, yeah. Some hops that are super old school that I get really excited about sometimes are like the really good lots of Centennial. Like I'm like, I want to pair this with everything under the sun. But the problem is it's really hard to find really good lots of Centennial. I don't know how Bell's does it all the time with Two Hearted, but if I could get Centennial like that all the time,
it has to do with the volume and where they pick in the order of pick.
I'm sure they pick those super early.
That's important. I think that's worth bringing up and talking about, right? Like as a brewer of 4 or 5 years old, we're trying to get our volume up and make more and more beer. We're just about now at the stage where we're getting to a point where we can order enough hops where us three can sit in a room, rub them, and be like, we want that lot. Which isn't a luxury that a lot of home brewers or smaller brewers have, and that can make all the difference in the world for some hops and not for others, right? Like for sure that like your Mosaic, your Galaxy, your Citra, you're gonna probably get a pretty good lot no matter where you buy it. But there are other hops that the difference between one lot and another might be like herbal and spicy versus like ultra tropical. And that could be a hop as well known as El Dorado, that could be Azaka, that could be Simcoe, Idaho 7, and that can make all the difference in the world in what your beer tastes like and how you perceive a hop. So it's exciting to us to finally be at a point where we're like, oh, next year we'll be able to pick our lot for that one or that one. But looking backwards, it's also, we did the best with what we had in front of us, and sometimes that meant maybe asking that extra question of a supplier, like our guy at BSG, and being like, hey, we get that you want to sell us 440 pounds of this El Dorado, but like, do you have a sample you can send us first so we can play around with it and just like get to know it before we build a beer around it? And we do that a lot, and I think that's a fair question, and most of those guys are super cool with doing that. Like, heck yeah. And that's small farms and big suppliers alike. Hey, we don't know what we like of the 4 years of crops you have available. Can you send us 1 ounce of each? We'll pay for it. Send it to us. We rub it. We decide amongst us what we like, and then we order what we want to use.
We used Chinook recently, and like going back to hops, like we used it and it was like, all right, we could roll with this. It's like Chinook can roll like in a hazy brew, I think like Amarillo, maybe like I'm romanticizing it, but like Amarillo was maybe the first hop that blew our minds, and like to me it's like it's green and resiny again and fruity, and it's like, all right, we could roll with this. So it's like now the options that have opened up to use Amarillo with all these other beers is sick, and that's super cool and stuff like that. Like you don't see Chinook a lot, or you don't see Chinook now, and we use it like shit. Like here it is. Like if we use this the right way, we can unlock something in this. It could provide some real cool character in what we're trying to achieve. So that's super gnarly. If that comes on and off, I think that's super cool.
Yeah, it's Chinook's probably one of my favorite hop varietals, and for the longest time, a lot of brewers were kind of keeping it out of New England style IPAs, maybe besides bittering and for some kettle additions, but when you rub that hop, you realize that it still has so much of that great, like, ruby red grapefruit, like, pulpy, like, cotton candy, and it has, like, that pine characteristic that I'm always itching to taste, even when I'm drinking, like, a New England style that's sort of putting that in the background. And I think that as long as we're doing our due diligence to make sure that is playing well with the rest of the hops, that can sort of open a whole new level of complexity for New England style IPAs. Like, I just remember like early on that like everyone's like, oh yeah, you have to have tropical hop profiles in your New England style IPAs or else they're not New England style IPAs. And it's like, I feel like the style has gotten way
wrong.
I know, and the style has
right,
sort of evolved and grown beyond that sort of narrow-minded thinking.
Anyone who's saying that isn't actually tasting these New England IPAs from some of the folks that were on the forefront of that.
Oh yeah,
where they all still
Columbus.
Have,
yeah,
they still have
I know.
solid bitterness components to them.
For sure, CTZ.
Yeah. and definitely some of those kind of piney characters, just adding those layers of depth to them. And I mean, it's easy, I think, for anyone to build caricatures of what these styles are. And I mean, you can do that for every style. You can go make a Hefeweizen that's full of banana and clove, and it's just banana clove all day long.
Right.
But that's not that isn't going to make a great example of that beer. It's just going to make this caricature of the style of the beer, because it's not done in nuanced ways. And I think what you're saying is exactly right. That by layering in some of these almost familiar and classic characteristics, it builds, a bit of a connection between, where we've been and where we're going.
Yeah.
That also makes it taste like beer.
For sure. And, a lot of the things that draw people into New England style IPAs are a lot of, maybe different from what draws other people to New England style IPAs. Like, we talked a lot about it today with a lot of the Minnesota breweries that we were hanging out with, about how New England style IPAs are a great jumping in point for people who don't normally like IPAs.
Sure.
And that's kind of an oxymoron when you think about how many hops are going into these beers, But then you could say equally that hopheads get equally excited about it. And it's just because, consumers may not, early consumers, people who haven't gotten super into IPAs yet, misconstrue what they dislike about IPAs. And New England style IPAs are super approachable, but they're also super, super exciting for people who already have been down that pathway for IPAs. And I think it's a good way to, when you blend in hops that, in a traditional IPA might throw early new beer drinkers or new IPA drinkers, that might throw them off that pathway, you can slowly introduce those into New England style IPAs and sort of introduce that bitterness and that piney, resiny profile in a way that can really hook somebody,
For sure. So, what's next on the horizon for Hop Butcher?
Should I?
You want to take this one?
No, I want to. What, you mean hop wise? You mean anything in general wise?
Just answer that
I
question.
feel like. All right, I got you. So, can I say this, guys? You were asking about secret bangers. I feel like we're pretty safe at saying this.
There's only maybe 15 to 20,000 people that may listen to this eventually.
What do you the resident culture?
Oh, go. Yeah.
Can we talk about it? We're going to be brewing a beer with resident culture that's going to have this new hop varietal called Triumph, and it's a super small lot, and we got as much as we could, and we're super excited about it. We rubbed it, and we're like, this is weird and great in all the ways that we get super excited about. It's got sort of the unripened plantain, banana smoothie thing that Sabro has going on, but it also has some of those grapefruit, pithy, piney, bright citrusy characters of your Waimeas, your Chinooks, and your Centennials, and we're super excited to pair it with some really fun hops. And I think that if it works out, it's going to be something that we get super nerdy about in the future.
Yeah. We rubbed that. Justin talked about that a little bit, but we got a sample and we were like, oh my god, how is this not a hop that has 100,000 acres? But there's only 3 acres, one lot, and we were getting banana cream pie. So our first, the first obvious thought was, why don't we put this in milkshakes? Why don't we put this in New England styles? And it legit took us 8 or 9 months to track it down from the point we had a sample to the FDA approving it, to the hop suppliers actually getting it pelletized, to being able to ship it to us, because they focus on Citra, Mosaic, Simcoe, Cascade, etc. Literally everything else before they get to the smallest, most experimental, newer stuff that they run through machines and pelletize, etc. So we had our pellets wetted, and we were like, we want it, give us more. How much can we get? Can we get 22, or can we get 220 pounds, or can we get more? And instantly our brains are like, let's use it in New England style. Let's make a Heffa out of it. Let's put it into this beer that we've already made, but maybe it makes that beer a better beer. So we're, as you can tell, uber excited about a hop like that's coming down the pike, just as we would if we stumbled upon an experimental hop that just like blew our minds that we happened to use randomly. And there are a handful of experimental hops that we have in our cooler right now that we haven't even gotten around to. But when you do a sensory, or you hear of something, or you read a description, everything just kind of re-jockeys for position in terms of what gets you excited based on the types of beers we're brewing. So,
Jamie, we've essentially been a gypsy brewery for 4 years. So the next thing is that we need to open up a brewery in our own tap room.
Okay.
That's what's up next.
That's what's up next. Is there a timeline for that?
No.
That's just the bigger, broader.
We got to get working on it.
Soon,
I hear you. Well, I can't wait to taste what you brew with this Triumph hop with Resonant Culture. Can't wait to eventually come visit you in your tap room up in Chicago. Thanks to Jude and Jeremiah and Justin from Hop Butcher in Darien, Illinois right now, and soon to be maybe somewhere else or in that general Chicagoland area. Before we finish this up, I do want to throw out a few thanks here. G&D Chiller is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. SS Brewtech is committed to advancing brewing equipment design, performance, and quality. Bring the world to your brew house with select ingredients from BSG. Join the community of homebrewers at the American Homebrewers Association. And I want to send a special thanks to Jake Sauter of Clear River Beverage here in Minnesota for providing us with these cans of Hop Butcher that they had brought into the state so that we could drink some of these during the podcast night. Thank you, Jake. And thank you guys from Hop Butcher for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, Jamie.
If people want to learn more about Hop Butcher, where do they find you?
Hopbutcher.com. We've got an Instagram, we got a Facebook, and we got a Twitter. And if you want to talk to us on those channels, we will talk to you back.
Fantastic. If you enjoy the podcast, of course, please hit subscribe on whatever podcast platform you use. And we hope you go to beerandbrewing.com and click on that subscribe button and become a subscriber to the magazine, just like Jude is.
Right on.
We'll be back next week with another episode of the podcast. Cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.